The man had been feeling itchy for weeks, but he shrugged it off. He figured it was probably nothing serious, just some fleas or maybe a bug bite from the backyard. His house wasn't exactly spotless. They had 2 dogs and a cat running around, so bugs were bound to find their way in sooner or later. Besides, life was busy. Work deadlines, household chores, and taking care of the pets kept him occupied. The constant itch was annoying, but it didn't seem like something worth worrying about. At first, his wife didn't think much of it either. She noticed how restless he'd become at night, tossing and turning in bed, scratching endlessly. It sounded like sandpaper against the sheets. One evening, after hearing him groan yet again, she finally spoke up. "You've got to let me take a look at your skin," she said firmly. "This has gone on long enough." He hesitated, brushing her off with a laugh. "It's fine," he insisted. "Probably just dry skin or something." But deep down, even he knew it wasn't normal. Finally, after another sleepless night, he gave in. Sitting on the couch under the warm glow of the living room lamp, he rolled up his sleeves and lifted his shirt. His wife grabbed her reading glasses, leaned in close, and started inspecting his arms and torso. At first glance, everything seemed okay, just a few red marks scattered here and there. Nothing alarming. Then, as she squinted closer, her breath hitched. Her hand froze mid-air, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Whatever she saw made her blood run cold. Before he could ask what was wrong, she let out a scream that echoed through the room. It was sharp, piercing, and full of terror. Startled, he shot backward, nearly knocking over the side table. "What? What is it?" he stammered, panic rising in his chest. She didn't answer immediately, pointing instead at his stomach with trembling fingers. Confused and alarmed, he looked down and felt his stomach drop. There, embedded in his skin, were tiny black specks. They weren't still. They were moving. Alive. His heart pounded as reality sank in. These weren't fleas or random bites. Something far worse was going on. His mind raced with questions. What were these things? How had they gotten there? And why hadn't he noticed sooner? His wife, still shaken, managed to whisper, "We need to go to the doctor now." Neither of them slept that night. The image of those tiny invaders burrowed into his skin haunted them both. As they drove to an urgent care clinic early the next morning, silence filled the car. The man stared out the window, replaying the events of the previous night in his head. He couldn't shake the feeling of violation, as if his body had betrayed him. His wife gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white, trying to hold herself together for both of them. When they arrived at the clinic, the nurse took one look at his anxious expression and hurried them into an examination room. A doctor soon followed, examining his skin carefully. Using tweezers, the doctor plucked one of the creatures out and placed it under a microscope. After a few tense moments, the diagnosis came. Ticks. Not just any ticks. Deer ticks, known carriers of Lyme disease. The couple exchanged glances, a mix of relief and dread washing over them. Relief because at least they now knew what they were dealing with. Dread because Lyme disease was no small matter. If left untreated, it could lead to serious complications like joint pain, neurological issues, and even heart problems. The doctor assured them that catching it early was key and prescribed a course of antibiotics. Still, the weight of the situation hung heavily in the air. On the drive home, the man couldn't stop thinking about how this had happened. He worked from home most days, rarely venturing into wooded areas where ticks usually lived. Then it hit him, the backyard. Their yard was a mess, with overgrown grass, piles of leaves, and dense shrubs. It was the perfect hiding spot for wildlife, and apparently, ticks too. Their pets must have carried them inside without anyone noticing. That night, as he swallowed his first dose of antibiotics, he vowed to make changes, not just for himself, but for his family. This ordeal had been a wake-up call, a reminder of how easily things could spiral out of control. For now, though, all he could do was focus on getting better. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and action. The man started taking the antibiotics religiously, hoping they would do their job quickly. But no matter how many pills he swallowed, the mental toll of what had happened lingered. Every itch, every faint sensation on his skin made him jump. Was it another tick? Had he missed one during the examination? His mind spiraled into paranoia, replaying the image of those tiny black specks burrowed into his skin. His wife, on the other hand, channeled her fear into action. She wasn't about to let this happen again. Not to him, not to their family. The house became her battlefield, and she armed herself with gloves, garbage bags, and cleaning supplies. First, she tackled the carpets. Vacuuming wasn't enough. She went over every inch twice, making sure nothing was left behind. Then came the furniture. Couch cushions were flipped, chairs were scrubbed, and curtains were taken down for a thorough wash. But it wasn't just the house that needed attention. It was the pets too. Their 2 dogs and cat had always been part of the family, but now they were under strict scrutiny. She gave them all baths, inspecting their fur strand by strand for any sign of ticks or fleas. When she found even the tiniest bug, she froze, holding her breath before squashing it with a tissue. It was exhausting work, but she refused to stop until she was confident the house was safe. Meanwhile, the backyard became the next target. The tak. Overgrown grass, piles of leaves, and dense shrubs had created a perfect haven for wildlife, and apparently ticks. Her husband watched from the window as she marched outside with pruning shears and a rake. He wanted to help, but his body still felt drained from the stress and medication. So instead, he sat indoors, researching everything he could about ticks and how to prevent them. He learned about landscaping techniques like trimming bushes, keeping grass short, and creating barriers between wooded areas and open spaces. As the days passed, the house began to transform. The once cluttered living room now sparkled with cleanliness. The pets seemed happier after their spa day, wagging their tails and purring contentedly. Even the backyard looked different, tidier, less wild. But despite these efforts, the couple couldn't shake the unease that lingered in their minds. They knew the danger hadn't completely disappeared. It was just lying low, waiting for the next opportunity. One evening, while sitting together on the couch, they finally allowed themselves to talk about what had happened. The man broke the silence first. "I can't believe we didn't notice sooner," he admitted, shaking his head. "All those nights I thought it was just dry skin or stress. What if it had gotten worse?" His wife reached out and placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "We caught it in time," she said firmly. "That's what matters. And now we know. Better. We'll be more careful moving forward." Her words brought some comfort, but the experience had changed them both. For him, it was the paranoia, the constant second-guessing of every itch or bump. For her, it was a newfound determination to protect their home at all costs. Neither of them would ever look at their surroundings the same way again. In an effort to distract himself, the man dove deeper into his research. He discovered natural repellents like essential oils that could deter ticks without harming the environment. He read about protective clothing, long sleeves, pants tucked into socks, and vowed to wear them whenever he ventured outside. He even ordered special collars for the dogs designed to repel parasites. Knowledge became his shield against fear, and sharing what he learned gave him a sense of purpose. One day, while chatting with neighbors over coffee, he decided to bring up the topic. At first, he hesitated, unsure how much detail to share. But when he mentioned finding ticks on his own body, several people nodded knowingly. One neighbor recounted a similar scare with their child, while another shared tips on how to keep ticks away. To his surprise, the conversation turned into a brainstorming session, with everyone swapping advice and experiences. Inspired by the exchange, the man suggested forming a neighborhood group dedicated to tackling pest problems collectively. After all, if ticks were thriving in their area, it wasn't just one household's issue, it affected everyone. The idea was met with enthusiasm, and soon, plans were underway for community cleanup drives and educational workshops. For the first time since the ordeal began, the man felt a glimmer of hope. What had started as a terrifying discovery had somehow brought people together. As he walked back home that evening, he realized something important. This experience had taught him more than just how to deal with ticks. It had shown him the power of resilience, connection, and collective action. Life might never feel completely normal again, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. The man's newfound obsession with ticks and pest prevention didn't stop at his front door. As the days went by, he found himself constantly scanning every corner of the house, checking for signs of trouble. He'd inspect the pet's fur after their walks, run his fingers through the carpet to feel for anything unusual, and even check his clothes before getting into bed. It was exhausting, but he couldn't help it. Every little detail seemed important now, like a puzzle piece that could prevent another nightmare. His wife noticed how consumed he'd become with this routine. She understood why. He'd been through something terrifying, but she also worried about him. One evening, as they sat down to dinner, she gently said, "You're doing everything you can. You've got to give yourself a break." He looked up from his plate, frowning. "I know," he replied. "But what if I miss something? What if there's still one out there somewhere?" She sighed, setting her fork down. "We've cleaned the house top to bottom. The yard is safer now. The dogs have those fancy collars. We're covered. Trust me, okay?" Her words were meant to reassure him, but they only made him feel more conflicted. On one hand, he wanted to believe her. On the other hand, the memory of those tiny black specks crawling on his skin haunted him. How could he ever truly relax? Again? The next morning, he decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear his head. The fresh air felt good, though he couldn't shake the habit of scanning the ground as he walked. Leaves crunched underfoot, and he paused to examine a cluster of bushes near the sidewalk. Sure enough, he spotted a tick clinging to a blade of grass. His stomach churned, but instead of panicking, he pulled out his phone and snapped a picture. When he returned home, he shared the photo with the neighbors' group chat they'd created. "Found this guy on my walk today," he typed. "Reminder to stay vigilant." The response was immediate. Someone thanked him for the heads up, while another neighbor suggested spraying the area with natural repellents. A third chimed in with a tip about planting mint or lavender to deter pests naturally. The conversation reminded him of how much they'd all come together since his ordeal. It wasn't just about protecting individual homes anymore. It was about creating a safer environment for everyone. Inspired by the exchange, he decided to take things a step further. That weekend, he organized a community cleanup event. Flyers went up around the neighborhood inviting people to gather at the park to tackle overgrown areas and share tips on pest control. To his surprise, nearly 24 neighbors showed up armed with gloves, rakes, and trash bags. Even kids joined in, helping to pick up litter and stack fallen branches. As they worked side by side, conversations flowed easily. One woman talked about how she'd installed a cedar fence around her property because ticks hated the smell. Another man shared how he'd started using diatomaceous earth, a powder made from fossilized algae, to keep bugs away without harming his garden. The man listened intently, jotting down notes on his phone. Each story added another layer to his growing knowledge, and each interaction strengthened the bond between neighbors. By the end of the day, the park looked cleaner than it had in years. Piles of leaves and debris had been cleared, reducing potential hiding spots for ticks. Everyone gathered for a quick debrief, sharing snacks and cold drinks. The man stood up to thank everyone for coming. "This means a lot," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "We're not just cleaning up. We're looking out for each other." Afterward, as he walked home with his wife, he felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. For weeks, he'd been focused solely on his own fears and anxieties. But now he realized that channeling those feelings into action had made a real difference. Not just for him, but for the entire community. It was empowering, knowing that something so small as organizing a cleanup could bring people together and create lasting change. That night, as they settled into bed, his wife smiled at him. "See? You're making progress," she said softly. "And you're not alone in this anymore." He nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. Maybe he'd never fully forget the terror of finding those ticks on his skin, but he was starting to see it differently. Instead of letting it define him, he was using it as motivation to protect others. And in doing so, he was finding peace. Not just for himself, but for everyone around him. Still, As he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't help but wonder, what else could they do to make their neighborhood safer? There was always more work to be done, and he was determined to keep pushing forward. The man woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The community cleanup had been a success, but he knew it was just the beginning. There were still questions nagging at him. What more could they do? How could they ensure that ticks didn't come back? He decided to dig deeper, not just for himself, but for everyone in the neighborhood. His research led him to some surprising discoveries. One article caught his attention. It talked about how birds and rodents often carried ticks into residential areas. Squirrels, mice, and even common backyard birds could unknowingly bring these pests right into people's yards. This revelation made him think twice about their bird feeder hanging near the patio. Sure, it brought cheerful chirping to their mornings. But was it worth the risk? After discussing it with his wife, they agreed to move the feeder farther away from the house and clean up any spilled seeds regularly. Another tip he stumbled upon was using mulch as a barrier. Apparently, ticks hated crossing dry, rough surfaces, like wood chips or gravel, because it disrupted their ability to cling to moisture. Inspired, he headed to the local garden center and bought several bags of cedar mulch. Over the weekend, he spread it around the perimeter of their yard, creating a clear boundary between the grassy areas and the wooded edges. It wasn't perfect, but it gave him a small sense of control, a line drawn in the sand against unwanted intruders. His efforts didn't stop there. He started paying closer attention to the weather reports. Ticks thrived in warm, humid conditions, so on days when rain was forecasted, he made sure to check the pets thoroughly once they came inside. He also kept an eye out for signs of wildlife, activity in the yard. Tracks in the dirt, chewed leaves, or unusual droppings became clues that something might be lingering nearby. And if animals were present, ticks likely weren't far behind. But it wasn't all serious work. One evening, while scrolling through social media, he came across a funny meme about ticks. It showed a cartoon bug saying, "I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to ruin your life." Despite everything, he chuckled. Humor, he realized, was a powerful tool. Sharing the meme with the neighborhood group chat lightened the mood and reminded everyone that they weren't alone in this battle. Laughter, even in small doses, helped ease the tension that had built up over the past few weeks. As the weeks turned into months, the man noticed subtle changes, not just in his surroundings but within himself. The constant paranoia began to fade, replaced by a cautious awareness. He no longer jumped at every itch or scanned the ground obsessively during walks. Instead, he felt prepared, armed with knowledge and resources. If another tick ever showed up, he'd know exactly what to do. His wife saw the change too. She noticed how he smiled more often, how he seemed lighter somehow. One night, as they sat together, on the porch watching the sunset, she said, "You seem different lately. Happier." He nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah, I guess I am. At first I let it consume me. You know, the fear, the worry. But now, I feel like I've taken back some control. And helping the neighborhood has made a big difference too." She smiled, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "That's good to hear. You've worked hard for this." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of laughter coming from down the street. A group of kids was playing tag in the park, their shouts echoing through the cool evening air. The sight warmed his heart. Just a few months ago, he wouldn't have thought twice about it. Now, though, he couldn't help but feel proud. Those kids were safer because of the steps they'd taken as a community. Fewer ticks meant fewer risks, and that was something worth celebrating. Still, he knew the fight wasn't over. Ticks were resilient creatures, and nature always found a way to adapt. But instead of dreading the future, he chose to focus on the present. They'd done everything they could to protect their home and their neighbors. For now, that was enough. Later that week, he received a message from one of the neighbors who had attended the cleanup event. Attached was a photo of her newly installed cedar fence along with a note, "Thanks for inspiring us to take action. We're already seeing fewer bugs." Reading the message filled him with pride. What had started as a personal nightmare had blossomed into something much bigger, a shared mission to create a safer, healthier environment for everyone. As he closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, he reflected on how far they'd come. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught him valuable lessons about resilience, teamwork, and finding strength in adversity. Life would never be completely free of challenges, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the key was learning how to face them head-on and coming out stronger on the other side. The man's newfound confidence didn't mean he was completely free of worry. Every once in a while, something would trigger a memory of that night. The way his wife had screamed, the panic in her voice, the sight of those tiny black specks moving on his skin. It was like a shadow lurking at the edges of his mind, ready to creep back in if he let his guard down. But instead of letting it drag him under, he learned to acknowledge it and move forward. One Saturday morning, as he sipped his coffee on the porch, he noticed one of their dogs scratching furiously at its ear. His heart skipped a beat. "Not again," he muttered under his breath. Setting his mug down, he called the dog over and carefully inspected its fur. After a few tense moments, he sighed in relief. It was just a patch of dry skin. Still, the incident reminded him how fragile their sense of security could be. Even with all their precautions, there was no such thing as being 100% safe. Later, that day, he decided to visit the local vet clinic. He figured it wouldn't hurt to double-check the health of their pets and ask about additional preventive measures. The vet was friendly and thorough, asking questions about their routines and inspecting each animal closely. When the checkup was done, she handed him a brochure on tick-borne diseases and recommended a monthly treatment plan for the dogs and cat. "It's always better to stay ahead of these things," she said with a reassuring smile. Walking out of the clinic, he felt grateful for the advice and a little overwhelmed. There was so much information to process, so many steps to take, but deep down he knew it was worth it. Protecting his family wasn't just about fixing problems after they happened. It was about staying proactive, staying vigilant. Back home, his wife greeted him with an excited grin. "Guess what?" she said, holding up a package. Inside was a set of motion-activated lights designed to deter nocturnal animals like raccoons and opossums from wandering into their yard. She'd read online that these critters often carried ticks, and installing the lights seemed like a smart move. Together, they spent the afternoon setting them up along the fence line. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they tested the system by waving their arms near the sensors. The sudden burst of light made them both laugh. It felt good to tackle problems together, turning fear into action. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the conversation turned to the future. "Do you think we'll ever stop thinking about this?" his wife asked suddenly. Her tone was light, but he could tell she meant it seriously. He thought for a moment before answering. "Probably not entirely, but I think we'll get better at managing it. Like, it won't control us anymore." She nodded slowly, picking at her food. "You're right. We've already come so far. Remember how scared we were at first? Now, we have a whole plan in place." Her words struck a chord. Looking back, it was hard to believe how powerless they'd felt when this ordeal began. Back then, every itch or red mark had been a potential disaster. Now, they had tools, strategies, and even a supportive community to rely on. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. A few days later, the man received an invitation from another neighbor to join a gardening workshop focused on creating pest-resistant landscapes. Intrigued, he accepted and brought his wife along. The workshop was held in someone's backyard where rows of vibrant plants stretched across the property. The host explained how certain flowers and herbs like marigolds, rosemary, and lavender could naturally repel insects, including ticks. As they walked through the garden, the man couldn't help but feel inspired. Here was proof that beauty and function could coexist. Why settle for a plain yard when you could grow plants that were both attractive and protective? By the end of the session, he and his wife had signed up to purchase several starter kits, eager to transform their own space. When they returned home, they wasted no time getting started. Over the next few weekends, they dug trenches, planted seeds, and watered diligently. Watching the tiny sprouts push through the soil filled them with hope. Each new leaf represented progress, a step toward reclaiming their peace of mind. But it wasn't just about their yard. Their efforts rippled outward, inspiring others to follow suit. Neighbors began swapping stories about their gardens, sharing cuttings and seeds. Someone even started a shared spreadsheet listing which plants worked best against pests. The sense of camaraderie grew stronger with each passing week, turning strangers into friends. One evening, as they watered the newly planted herbs, his wife paused and looked at him. "You know," she said softly, "this has changed us. Not just our house or our yard, but us." He smiled, leaning on the handle of the watering can. "Yeah, it has. And honestly, I think we're better for it." She laughed, nudging him playfully. "Don't get too mushy on me now." They finished, their chores in comfortable silence, the sound of crickets filling the air. For the first time in months, the man felt truly at ease. Sure, the world outside still held its dangers, but inside their home and within their community, they had built something strong enough to withstand them. As the stars blinked to life above them, he realized something important. Resilience wasn't about avoiding challenges altogether. It was about facing them head-on, learning from them and growing stronger because of them. And maybe, just maybe, finding joy in the process. As the weeks rolled by, life settled into a new rhythm. The man and his wife had turned their focus from fear to action, channeling their energy into making their home safer, while also helping their neighbors do the same. But even with all the progress they'd made, there were still moments when doubt crept in, tiny reminders of how fragile their sense of security really was. One afternoon, as he sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, he came across an article about Lyme disease, outbreaks in nearby towns. According to the report, cases were rising sharply due to warmer weather patterns that allowed ticks to thrive longer each year. His stomach tightened as he read the statistics. It wasn't just their neighborhood at risk, it was everywhere. For a moment, he felt that familiar wave of panic wash over him. Would they ever truly be safe? But then he stopped himself. He took a deep breath and closed the app. Instead of letting the fear take hold, he reminded himself of everything they'd already accomplished. They had cleaned up their yard, treated their pets, installed motion-activated lights, and planted pest-resistant herbs. Their community was stronger now, more informed and prepared than before. These weren't small victories, they were big ones, and they mattered. That evening, he shared the article with his wife during dinner. She listened quietly, her brow furrowed as she absorbed the information. When he finished, she looked up and said, "It's scary, I know, but we can't let it paralyze us. We've done so much already. Let's keep going." Her words struck a chord. He realized that resilience wasn't about ignoring fear, it was about acknowledging it and choosing to act anyway. So instead of dwelling on the worst-case scenarios, they decided to double down on their efforts. The next day, they reached out to the local health department to see if they offered any resources or workshops on tick prevention. To their surprise, they did, and better yet, one was scheduled for the following week. The workshop turned out to be eye-opening. Experts spoke about the importance of wearing protective clothing when spending time outdoors, using repellents properly, and checking yourself and your pets thoroughly after being in wooded areas. One presenter even demonstrated how to remove a tick safely using fine-tipped tweezers. As they watched, the man felt a strange mix of emotions, relief at knowing exactly what to do if another tick ever showed up, but also frustration that this knowledge hadn't been available sooner. Afterward, they stayed behind to chat with some of the attendees. Many of them were locals who had dealt with similar issues. One woman shared how her son had contracted Lyme disease years ago, and how it had changed their family's entire approach to outdoor activities. Another man talked about how he used to think ticks were only a problem in rural areas until he found one on his leg after a hike in a suburban park. Listening to their stories reinforced the idea that no one was immune, not even those who lived in cities or suburbs. On the drive home, the man turned to his wife and said, "You know, I Think we should share this stuff with the neighborhood group too. Maybe host our own little info session? She grinned. I love that idea. Let's do it. Over the next few days, they worked together to organize a casual gathering in their backyard. They printed out flyers and posted them around the area, inviting everyone to stop by for snacks, drinks, and a quick lesson on tick safety. On the day of the event, they set up folding chairs under a canopy, laid out trays of cookies and lemonade, and waited to see who would show up. To their delight, nearly a dozen neighbors arrived, eager to learn. The man stood up nervously, holding a pair of tweezers and a magnifying glass he'd brought along for demonstration purposes. Okay, he began, clearing his throat. So, none of us want to deal with ticks again, right? Well, here are a few things we can all do to stay protected. He went on to explain the tips they'd picked up at the workshop, showing how to check for ticks, remove them safely, and recognize early signs of infection, like the telltale bullseye rash associated with Lyme disease. His wife chimed in with anecdotes from their own experience, adding humor and warmth to the conversation. By the end of the session, people were laughing, asking questions, and swapping ideas. One neighbor, an older gentleman who had been quiet throughout most of the discussion, finally spoke up. You two have done a lot for this community, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. Thank you. This kind of thing, it brings people together. The compliment caught them off guard, leaving both the man and his wife momentarily speechless. All they could do was smile and nod, feeling a surge of gratitude for the people around them. As the sun began to set and the guests started heading home, the couple lingered outside, tidying up the leftover cups and plates. Their yard looked different now, not just because of the new plants and mulch, but because of the connections they'd forged. What had once felt like a personal battle against an invisible enemy had transformed into something far greater. A shared mission to protect and support each other. Later that night, as they lay in bed, the man turned to his wife and said, "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad this happened." She raised an eyebrow, surprised. Glad? Really? He chuckled. Not about the ticks, obviously, but about everything else. The way it brought us closer, not just to each other, but to everyone around us. We've built something good out of something bad. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. Yeah, me too. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the night, they both felt a profound sense of peace. Life would always have its challenges, its uncertainties, but they had learned how to face them, together, and that, more than anything, gave them hope for whatever lay ahead. The days that followed the backyard info session brought a renewed sense of purpose to the neighborhood. The man and his wife noticed subtle changes in how their neighbors interacted with each other. People who had previously only exchanged polite nods now stopped for longer conversations while walking their dogs or tending to their gardens. There was a shift in the air, a growing bond fueled by shared experiences and mutual support. One morning, as the man watered the newly planted herbs in their front yard, he saw a neighbor across the street struggling to install a fence post. Without hesitation, he grabbed his toolbox and walked over to lend a hand. Together, they worked side by side, chatting about everything from tick prevention to weekend plans. By the time the job was done, they weren't just acquaintances anymore. They were friends. This kind of connection wasn't limited to him. His wife began organizing weekly coffee meetups at the park, inviting women from the neighborhood to join her. At first, it was just a casual way to unwind, but soon it evolved into something more meaningful. Conversations ranged from parenting tips to home improvement projects, but inevitably, the topic of ticks would come up. Each story shared added another layer of understanding, another piece of advice to pass along. These gatherings became a safe space where everyone felt heard and supported. Back at home, the couple continued refining their strategies for keeping pests at bay. They invested in a high-powered outdoor vacuum designed to suck up debris and insects from hard-to-reach areas like crevices in the patio and baseboards inside the house. It was a small addition, but it gave them peace of mind, knowing they could tackle even the tiniest hiding spots. Their efforts didn't go unnoticed. One evening, as they sat on the porch enjoying the cool breeze, a young couple from down the block approached them. "We've been meaning to thank you," the woman said shyly. "Your tips have really helped us feel safer. We've started using those natural repellents you mentioned, and we're thinking about planting some lavender too." The man smiled warmly, feeling a swell of pride. "That's great to hear," he replied. "If there's anything else you need help with, don't hesitate to ask." Word spread quickly, and before long the couple found themselves unofficially leading the charge against ticks in the community. Requests for advice poured in: how to properly apply flea treatments to pets, which plants worked best for repelling bugs, where to buy affordable protective gear. They didn't mind the extra responsibility. If anything, it made them feel useful. But not every day was smooth sailing. One afternoon, the man received a call from a neighbor whose child had developed a mysterious rash after playing in the woods behind their house. Panic set in immediately. Could it be Lyme disease? The frantic parent asked over the phone. He reassured them as best he could, advising them to take the child to the doctor right away and offering to accompany them if needed. Thankfully, tests later confirmed it wasn't Lyme disease, just an allergic reaction to poison ivy. But the incident served as a stark reminder of how unpredictable life could be. Even with all their precautions, there were no guarantees. That night, as he recounted the story to his wife, he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. What if it had been something worse? He wondered aloud. What if we can't protect everyone? She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "We're doing everything we can," she reminded him. "And that's enough. You can't control everything, but you can make a difference. That's what matters." Her words resonated deeply. He realized that perfection wasn't the goal. It was progress. Every step they took, no matter how small, contributed to a larger effort to keep their community safe. And while setbacks were inevitable, they didn't define success or failure. What mattered most was persistence. Inspired by this perspective, the man decided to expand their outreach beyond the neighborhood. He created a simple blog where he documented their journey, the initial scare, the research, the steps they'd taken, and the lessons they'd learned along the way. He included practical advice, product recommendations, and even personal reflections on overcoming fear. To his surprise, the blog gained traction quickly, drawing readers from nearby towns and even other states. Comments poured in from people sharing their own stories and thanking him for providing clear, actionable guidance. Some offered additional tips, while others simply expressed gratitude for making them feel less alone in their struggles. Reading through the messages filled him with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't expected. This wasn't just about protecting his family anymore. It was about helping others navigate similar challenges. His wife encouraged him to keep going, suggesting they start filming short videos to complement the blog. Reluctantly, he agreed, though the idea of being on camera made him nervous. Their first video was raw and unpolished, a quick tour of their pest-resistant garden interspersed with explanations of why certain plants were chosen. But viewers loved it. The authenticity shone through, creating a genuine connection with the audience. As the weeks went by, the channel grew steadily, attracting subscribers eager to learn more. Requests for content poured in: tutorials on tick removal, DIY repellent recipes, interviews with experts. The man embraced the challenge, pouring hours into scripting, filming, and editing. It was exhausting work, but it also brought immense satisfaction. For the first time in months, he felt truly alive, not just surviving but thriving. Through it all, the couple remained grounded, never losing sight of what had sparked this journey in the first place: a desire to protect their loved ones and their community. Every video, every blog post, every conversation was a testament to their resilience and determination. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: they were ready to face whatever came next, together. Months had passed since that terrifying night when the man's wife first screamed at the sight of ticks on his skin. What started as a deeply personal struggle had transformed into something far greater: a journey of growth, connection, and resilience. The couple looked back on everything they'd been through: the fear, the sleepless nights, the endless cleaning, and marveled at how much they'd changed. Their home was different now. It wasn't just cleaner or safer. It felt like a sanctuary. The pest-resistant plants in their garden flourished, filling the air with fragrant scents of lavender and rosemary. Motion-activated lights illuminated the yard at night, deterring nocturnal visitors. Inside, the house gleamed with care and attention to detail. Every corner told a story of effort and love, a testament to their determination to reclaim their peace of mind. But the transformation went beyond their physical space. Their relationship had deepened in ways neither of them could have predicted. They'd faced this challenge side by side, leaning on each other during moments of doubt and celebrating small victories together. Whether it was pulling weeds in the garden or brainstorming ideas for the next video, they worked as a team. That bond brought them closer than ever before. The neighborhood, too, had undergone a remarkable shift. What once felt like a collection of individual households now resembled a tight-knit community. People shared resources, exchanged tips, and supported one another without hesitation. The weekly coffee meetups became a cherished tradition, drawing more participants each time. Even kids joined in, learning about tick prevention in fun, interactive ways like scavenger hunts designed to teach them how to spot potential hazards outdoors. One day, while scrolling through comments on his blog, the man came across a message that stopped him in his tracks. A woman from another state wrote about how her family had fallen victim to Lyme disease years ago. She described the toll it took on their lives, the pain, the uncertainty, the medical bills, and explained how reading his posts had inspired her to take action. "You've given me hope," she wrote. "Hope that we can protect ourselves and prevent this from happening again." Reading those words left him speechless. He realized then that what they were doing wasn't just about ticks or safety. It was about empowering others to face their fears and take control of their lives. This realization filled him with a profound sense of purpose. For so long he'd focused on protecting his own family, but now he saw the ripple effect of their efforts. Every piece of advice, every video, every conversation mattered because it reached people who needed it most. His wife noticed the change in him. One evening, as they sat together on the couch reviewing footage for an upcoming video, she smiled and said, "You seem lighter these days, happier." He nodded thoughtfully. "I think I am. At first, all I cared about was fixing our problems. But now, I feel like we're part of something bigger, like we're making a real difference." She leaned over and kissed his cheek. "That's because you are, and I'm proud of you." Their pride extended to the entire community. When fall arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and vibrant foliage, the neighborhood celebrated with a harvest festival. Stalls lined the streets, offering homemade jams, baked goods, and crafts. Kids ran around playing games, while adults mingled over hot cider and roasted chestnuts. In the center of it all stood a booth dedicated to tick awareness, complete with informational pamphlets, free samples of natural repellents, and even live demonstrations of proper tick removal techniques. The turnout was overwhelming. Neighbors weren't the only ones stopping by. People from neighboring towns showed up, eager to learn. The man spent hours answering questions, sharing stories, and handing out flyers. By the end of the day, his voice was hoarse, but his heart was full. Seeing so many people come together to tackle a shared problem reminded him why they'd started this journey in the first place. As winter approached, life slowed down a bit. The man and his wife took time to reflect on everything they'd accomplished. While the threat of ticks would always linger, they no longer lived in constant fear. Instead, they embraced a mindset of preparedness and vigilance, knowing they had the tools and knowledge to handle whatever came their way. One snowy evening, as they sat by the fireplace sipping hot chocolate, the man turned to his wife and said, "Do you remember that night? The one where you screamed?" She laughed softly, shaking her head. "How could I forget? It feels like a lifetime ago." "I know," he replied. "But look at us now. We've come so far." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the warmth of the fire wrap around them. Outside, Snowflakes drifted gently to the ground, blanketing the world in quiet stillness. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but they had found strength in adversity. Together they had built something beautiful out of chaos, a safer home, a stronger marriage, and a thriving community. And as they gazed into the flickering flames, they both knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them head-on, not with fear but with courage, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the power of connection.